This is something that I really should not have to do, and neither should any other campaigners. I find what's gone on over these past 30-odd years has been a disgrace on the system of our nation. When you talk about the scales of justice, I was born under the Libra sign, which is the scales of justice, but they're unbalanced. They're balanced against the victims. They're more for the perpetrators in this country. This country really, and governments, should be ashamed of themselves for what's gone on at Hillsborough. You know, we can go back into the dark ages, and I can't see where anything has actually changed. In the dark ages, there was a system. There was the first class, second class, third class. Well, unfortunately, we've always been the third class. We've been the bottom of that scale. Now, we done nothing wrong at Hillsborough. Our fans were accused of killing their own. Our dead were accused of helping to kill themselves. What an absolute, utter disgrace. Now, we've been called, over all of these years, whinging Scousers. I'm proud to be a Scouser, and I'm proud of our city, and I'm proud of our people, and I am definitely proud of our supporters of that day. They were the heroes. And I'm here today to argue about a Hillsborough law. We shouldn't have to argue this. We should get the Hillsborough law immediately put into place. There's so many people. You only have to look at Grenfell, the arena bomb attack. These families deserve justice. Now, the Hillsborough law will not do any good for the Hillsborough families. But we're here today for us all to be united to change things. Because them 97 victims who died at Hillsborough, they deserve the respect and a Hillsborough law in honour of their name. And if that does any good for the likes of other people going forward, that's all that matters.
When things go wrong in this country, the fight that people face is too long and too hard. When things go wrong, the authorities close ranks. They blame victims sometimes. They sometimes create false narratives that can be very hard to shift. And it's because power in this country is not necessarily in the hands of the many, it's concentrated in the hands of far too few. And access to justice here is still very much linked to your class, your accent, and whether or not you have social connections.
The fact that after decades of campaigning, not a single person has been held accountable for the tragedy is a stain on the judicial system in this country and on the institutions that many of us were brought up to put our trust in.
Hi everyone, so my name's Charlotte Hennessey and I am daughter of Jimmy Hennessey, who was killed in the Hillsborough disaster. I've been asked to just talk a little bit about the Hillsborough law that we're now campaigning for. So my dad was 29 when he died at Hillsborough. I was 6 and I never really found out what happened to him until the Hillsborough Independent Panel report, which looked at all evidence. There was hundreds of thousands worth of documents that they examined and they looked at and gave their conclusions, and part of that conclusion was that my dad was one of the 41 that could have been saved. So if we go right back to the original inquests, if that had been carried out properly and all evidence would have been able to have been heard, we would have known all those years ago that my dad was totally savable. Because that wasn't allowed to happen, it was then 23 years later before I found out what actually happened to him. I didn't know how he entered the ground. I didn't know what pen he was in, how he got out. I really didn't know anything. So going on from there, we then had the new inquests, which concluded that my dad's cause of death was actually not traumatic asphyxiation, and that his cause of death was very different to all of those others who died. So then we had the prosecution of David Duckenfield, which he was found not guilty for, despite the inquest concluding that he was killed as a result of gross negligence manslaughter, and that Duckenfield was responsible for that. We then had other trial, which was of the solicitor who then represented South Yorkshire Police, Peter Metcalfe, and also two senior police officers, Denton and Foster. So they were charged with perverting the course of justice because there was evidence that they had amended police statements. The judge subsequently threw that trial out of court and dismissed it, because what he said was that those statements had only been amended for a public inquiry which is very similar now to the ones that Grenfell families are going through. So effectively, they were allowed to sanitise the evidence to suit that of South Yorkshire Police Force. And that effectively, then, because it was just for a public inquiry, it technically meant that they hadn't done anything to a criminal standard. So they couldn't be tried for perverting the course of justice. Now, if we had a Hillsborough law, that would mean that actually they had committed an offence, because they would have had a duty of candour to tell the truth and make sure that all evidence was heard in its original form. So what we're now campaigning for is that a Hillsborough law would make sure that all people within public authority have a duty of candour to tell the truth at public inquiries, but also to ensure that families like yours, survivors of the Grenfell fire, are entitled to legally the same amount of funding or on an equal par to ensure that you too are allowed the correct legal representation. It's very widely known now that legal aid is not being permitted, and it has been cut back quite dramatically. So we're in a situation now where we have some families who aren't entitled to legal funding to have legal representation at inquests or at public inquiries. So the worrying thing for families like ours is that you will go through what we went through. The Taylor inquiry concluded that Liverpool fans were not to blame for the Hillsborough disaster. It also concluded that there were police failings, but our legal system has allowed those officers, South Yorkshire Ambulance Service, they have all pretty much gotten away with the unlawful killing of 97 people, and that is just not okay. We cannot allow for this to keep on happening. It's, Grenfell is an example of protection under the Hillsborough law. Manchester Arena bombings, the COVID bereaved families who now want a public inquiry into how their loved ones died and if the government did enough. And we just can't let this culture continue in the UK, in a judicial system that is supposed to protect us. But also, we cannot allow people in public authority who are paid to protect us, they're paid to serve us, and they are getting away with murder.
Grenfell United have pledged their support for the Hillsborough law. It requires public bodies that are happy to take public funds to act and be held accountable to public duty. We believe that this is a legacy not just for the people of Hillsborough and not just for the people of Grenfell, but also everybody whose loved ones have perished due to action or inaction by the state. The justice system just isn't right, it isn't fair, it just treats victims with contempt and enables justice to be avoided. If you can pay to have your lawyers avoid you having to accept responsibility and be accountable for the deaths of innocent people. When you have paid for lawyers able to make a case, they will make a case at the expense of justice. But that's the way that our justice system is set up. You know, the people of Grenfell have benefited from being considered an exception. None of that legal support is enshrined in law, and so you're at the behest of the government. You know, the government, after a period of inaction, did come forward and offer to cover legal costs for Grenfell families, whether it's during the inquiry or a subsequent inquest once it starts. Well, justice just doesn't work because on the one side you have state bodies, for example the police, with all their lawyers and all their budgets, and then individual people, real people like me and you, who don't have access to those sorts of resources, don't have unlimited budgets, and so there is no parity of arms. The Hillsborough law would enshrine the right to parity of law. UK legal history is littered with the state getting away with the deaths of innocent people. So we call on all of the friends of Grenfell United and all the friends of Hillsborough and everyone associated with any campaign for justice to write to their MP to demand the Hillsborough laws placed before Parliament. And now please take 72 seconds with us to remember those we lost.